Time to look at some more Formula One upgrades, and we're at the front of the grid this time. We're going to be looking at some innovations that we've seen on the Red Bull and the Ferrari in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And who better to talk us through them than our technical expert, Jake Boxall-Legge, and our Grand Prix editor, Edd Straw. JBL, we're going to start with Red Bull, and even the untrained eye can tell that is suspension, but tell us what's special about the changes Red Bull have made to their suspension and what we saw in Baku.
Okay, so, well, this has been running on the car since the start of the year. We've only just spotted this now. By we, I mean Giorgio Piola has only just spotted this now. I would have been here for a very much longer time. But what it is, well, you might be able to see the difference actually. It's this bottom wishbone and the top wishbone. This is a conventional wishbone setup, and this is a split wishbone. What Red Bull have managed to do is turn their top wishbone into essentially two separate members. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed 6 different suspension members, and a wishbone usually counts as 2. So they've broken that into 2 essentially. And what this does is it gives them a little bit more control over what the camber settings are like during mid-corner. So this essentially, it sort of works in a similar way to what multi-link suspension does. And when the car is cornering, what's known as the kingpin angle changes. So the kingpin angle is sort of the angle between the attachment point at the bottom of the wishbone and the top wishbone on the upright. And so when the wheel lifts up, when it's cornering or something like that, the camber is able to change, and therefore the driver is able to get a little bit more grip. So this is a slightly better angle of it, so you can clearly see the 2 distinct suspension arms there. And so when that car is cornering, it's able to generate a little bit more grip because the camber is changing mid-corner. So when the car is turning, it sort of leans towards the outside if you're turning this way. And so that's going to load up the outside tyre, but the inside tyre isn't quite as loaded, and because it's a weird camber angle, it's not going to get as much grip, and so you might suffer a little bit of understeer because you're just not being able to turn as much. So that's able to help that tyre generate a better camber angle mid-corner, and so it's able to bite the road a little bit more easily, and so the driver's not going to have to take as many bites at the chariot trying to get into the apex of the corner. He's able to just put a little bit more steering on, goes into the corner a little bit more easily, and it's able to sort of bite in the corner rather than having to seesaw the wheel a little bit. So that's just to kind of help that a little bit, but it's also to try and sort of, it has a secondary effect of helping the aerodynamics a little bit because it's sort of broken up into 2 pieces, and so it's not as liable, airflow isn't as liable to separate, and it also changes the way that the sort of tyre deforms as well. So it's changing, you know, that sort of impact on the airflow behind it. So it's got a few different bits and pieces. It's quite an interesting design. I don't think we've not seen anything like this before at the front. As Ed, you've mentioned before in a piece, Toyota tried something similar at the rear a couple of years back, but yeah, this is quite a new and innovative suspension design.
You mentioned there that this isn't something that we've seen really elsewhere. Why do you think that is? Is this difficult to execute and to control well? If it's the benefits there, as you've laid them out, seem quite obvious. Why has it taken this long for a team to try it?
It's because I think F1 suspension now is at a point where it ceases to be like regular suspension designs that you see in cars. It's aerodynamic gain is its sort of the key reason why it's the way it is. Taking a sort of key suspension idea, a key vehicle dynamic sort of ethos, if you like, and turning it back into something that Formula One has sort of strayed away from for the last few years. So it's, as you say, the benefits are there, but maybe just no one's just thought of it until Red Bull have come up with this idea. So it's presumably quite difficult to execute. That's why teams have gone for a very conventional setup for a number of years now. We don't usually see too many changes in that part of the car, so it's quite refreshing to see that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Ed, and as JBL said there, it has been on the car since the start of the year. We're 4 races in now for Red Bull. It's always interesting to try and judge how the Red Bull chassis and the mechanics of the car compared to their rivals at the front, because you've always felt that they're a little bit behind perhaps on the engine stakes. How would you assess how Red Bull started the season so far?
I think it's pretty positive for Red Bull. The car is quick, as you say. Honda is still a slightly limiting factor, although compared to the Renault they had last year, it's potentially a bit of a step forward already, so they're on a good trajectory with that. But yeah, the car's working pretty well. It's showing good pace, and in the race it was really interesting. Now there was a period from the in the start of the second stint through to the VSC being deployed, when Verstappen was 0.3 faster than the Mercedes drivers, than Vettel. So really, really motoring, but he'd obviously lost some time at the start of the race, but properly quick. And just to back that up, Pierre Gasly, once he got into clear air from his pit lane start, he had a period of just over 20 laps, when if you benchmark him against Leclerc, who was on the mediums as well, so completely comparable, he was 0.179 per lap faster than Leclerc. So in race conditions, the Red Bull's really, really quick. So who knows what could have happened if Verstappen could have been a place or two up the grid. But it shows how quick that car is in race conditions. What's a real shame is that we haven't seen a Red Bull fighting on kind of equal footing as a car for a long time. We're still not. If the qualifying modes were less of a thing, it could be much more interesting, because now all Red Bull can really hope to do in qualifying is pick off a few Mercedes or Ferrari through a bit of good fortune, the perfect toe, that kind of thing. But fundamentally, a quick car, they're good in terms of managing the thermal deg over a stint, in terms of getting the tyres working. Of course, suspension can play a part in that. Downforce is a part of that, but also the way you load the tyres, etc., will have an impact.
Let's move on to Ferrari then. And Jake, it wasn't too long ago that we had Giorgio Piola in the studio with us, and one of the things we were bemoaning about Ferrari was that we hadn't seen any updates, or Giorgio hadn't been able to take any pictures of anything new and come up with any new drawings for us. But we finally got that in Baku. So talk us through what was new on the Ferrari.
Yep, so that's this array of little bargeboard pieces here. So they've been reconfigured. I'd then throw, if we had a studio audience, I'd throw this up to them and say, what does this do? It turns airflow a little bit better. That's the general idea behind it. They've also added this little spoon section here, which just essentially takes much more airflow off of this, and it's able to control it a little bit more. So this is the first, as you say, the first real aerodynamic update we've seen from Ferrari this year. They've been really lacking on that front. And finally, Baku, they've decided to bring something to try and bring the fight to Mercedes a little bit. Obviously didn't pay off as such, but I don't think that's not really through the updates as such. It's just they just had a very unfortunate weekend. And Ferrari have continued that by bringing a small update to the floor. Now, this is something we saw in last year. They brought a range of these little fins to, I think it was Japan. They tested them out in practice and they didn't really get on with them, so decided to leave them off over the rest of the season. Clearly they were sort of tooling around back at Maranello and thought, this is useful and we need to find a way to get this to work out.
Yeah, because this was kind of classified in the package of failed updates that almost derailed the end of their season at one point, didn't it?
Yeah, clearly they've taken some inspiration from that, or just spent some time working at it and thinking, okay, we can turn more airflow around this rear tyre, because they don't have really much scope to do that. They don't have a big bargeboard package at the rear of the car, so you can't really do that, but this is the best they can get. It sort of works with this tyre squirt slot as well, just to manage that airflow from the tyre as much as possible. So that's another part of it. But they've also brought some Baku specific pieces as well, so a bit of a change in the rear wing. Going for, it wasn't quite as low downforce as some of the other cars, but we did see Ferrari sort of thinking, okay, we've got quite a lot of engine power to play with, so let's trim a little bit off the rear wing, but not too much. We still have that speed down the straight, so I think that was a good show of confidence from them. Again, it didn't work out, but they seemed to be on the right track. They looked good until qualifying hit, really.
That's a really good point, isn't it, Ed? That JBL says there, the car actually looked quite good and quite quick, and then Ferrari's weekend seemed to unravel for other reasons. So is there reason to believe that the updates they brought to the car did make a difference, did give them a step forward, and that actually it probably wasn't necessarily pure car performance that cost them in Baku?
Yeah, I think certainly there's no evidence the upgrades didn't work. I think they were reasonably effective, and they seemed to trade off the drag to downforce and straight line speed pretty well. Obviously the weekend unravelled. Charles Leclerc's Q2 crash caused problems. The gradually dropping track temperature caused big problems, because it took almost 2 hours to get through qualifying, partly because of Leclerc's crash. So that didn't help, and that's the big thing for Ferrari. It's been very frustrating, because we've seen that the car, when it's working well, which hasn't a huge amount, seems to be very quick. Bahrain, obviously, it was the class of the field. It was looking promising at Bahrain, in Baku, but then the key thing is that it's the tyres. It's the bit that attaches the car to the road, and I don't think that, you talk about lack of upgrades in the first few races. I don't think downforce and aero is the big problem. It's the way they're working the tyres and the understanding of that. I mean, it's interesting that if you look in 17 and 18, Mercedes with its Diva cars was tending to overwork the tyres. It was really struggling, whereas Ferrari tended to sit in that sweet spot. Now, it can't be a coincidence that we've moved to more durable tyres, thinner gauge. They're designed for people to be able to push more on them. It's harder to get temperature into them because the temperature in the build-up in the tyres is basically a function of the sort of squashing and loading up the tyre. And if you've got less tread, there's less to move around, so you get less energy build-up. And I suspect probably what has happened is that Ferrari's just kind of moved closer towards the bottom end of the window and is dropping out of it, whereas Mercedes has kind of come back from the edge closer to the middle of it as a result of the way the tyres have gone, which is not down to any design on Pirelli's part, other than that they wanted more durable tyres that drivers could push on. So there's something inherent in the DNA of the Ferrari there, and it'll be partly the way that they load up the tyres, partly could be down to the suspension concept. Overall downforce is significant as well, but I don't think the Ferrari's especially miles behind on downforce or anything. It just isn't. So that's what they need to do. They need to understand what they can do to make the tyres work, and that will get the car working well. And it seems to be the high temperatures is better for Ferrari. It's frustrating really because you want as many cars as possible up there competing, and we've had 4 Mercedes 1-2s, which looks like greater domination than ever, which in results terms it is. But the Ferrari is a good car. They just need to get the most out of it, and I think it's a mechanical issue they need to get on top of, and the way they prep and work the tyres, and they've got to do some work in Spain to get on top of that. It could help the fact that they ran well in Spain in pre-season testing when it wasn't very warm. Perhaps there's some tricks there, but again, Barcelona's a very different circuit, lots of quick long corners, lots of load, so maybe that helps them out. But even when they're struggling, we've seen the Ferrari going well in the faster corners as well. So there's performance in there. It's got to be unlocked, and I think it's probably a good thing that they haven't thrown too many updates in it, because you need to understand how to get the best out of what you've got before you build on it. Downforce is your friend, and it might help if they could lump on a load more, but these are always incremental gains, and often the developments are about improving the stability and the consistency rather than peak downforce. So I think it's down to good old-fashioned understanding of the way you're loading the tyres mechanically.